In July 2012, you announced you had raised $26.5 million to set up operations in Texas. Who were the investors, and how will this work in terms of research and manufacturing?
Yeah, it was a very unusual group of investors and really committed to the long-term success of the company. And that was a very exciting aspect of this particular equity financing. So we had one of our core investors, Imperial Innovations, which is the technology spin-out arm of Imperial. At least that's where they started. They're now quoted on the London Stock Exchange as an investment company and committed to venture capital investing across.
So they're basically involved in getting the technologies out of Imperial College into the market.
Yeah, that was their start, but they're now working with a number of universities, and so they're no longer just focused on Imperial College. But obviously that's a good source. So they're one of our core investors, and they've stayed with us. We've brought in two new investors of a very different type. The most important investor was the Cancer Research and Prevention Institute of Texas, which is a $2 billion cancer fund based in Texas, which invests not only in basic science around the development of new cancer therapies, but also companies that are developing these therapies. And yeah, it's a very important source of funding for us, and it also...
So is that commercial funding, or is that...
They actually took an equity investment, so they own shares in the company.
But their purpose as commercial investors,
That's
or are
right.
they... Okay,
that's right.
Yeah.
Well, their purpose is to essentially foster cancer therapies.
Yeah.
Whether that's done through the academic route or done through companies...
Right.
That's less of a concern. Their job is to make sure that new cancer therapies are brought into the market.
Yeah. Do you worry that the trials might not be positive, and what would you do then?
Yeah, well, that's always a question. There's a huge amount of what we call phase 1, phase 2 data, not randomized controlled studies, which is the highest level of proving a therapy works, but a lot of academic studies which suggest that our cell therapies will work. So we are conducting now the randomized controlled study, which is the most intensive way of testing these therapies. Based upon the phase 1, phase 2 data, we're optimistic that we'll get the right result. If we don't, I think it will be more an issue of the level of benefit, because we are predicting a rather dramatic benefit in our clinical studies. So it is possible that we could be a little short in terms of the benefit and still have a very important...
In other words, it wouldn't work every time, or it wouldn't work to the optimum.
That's right, that's right. And so I think we will learn a lot about how we can use these cells, even if the studies don't actually achieve their endpoint. But we are very optimistic at this point that we will.
And last question, is this a sensible way to develop drugs?
I think it's a very special way, and certainly part of the future in terms of how we'll develop drugs. What we're doing, the Cell Medica model, is now actually being replicated by even big pharma companies. So it's the idea of building a partnership with a leading academic center, where the academic center takes more of the development risk, which can be very expensive for a commercial entity to be engaged with. And at a point in time when it's ready to be commercialized, that's when the companies get involved. So Cell Medica has been doing this since 2006. More recently, Novartis has announced a similar type of arrangement with the University of Pennsylvania, again aimed at this type of cancer immunotherapy. So it was actually quite pleasing to see that Novartis is now essentially
following the model.
Following a model that we and others, of course, have been working with. But I think in the future, because many of these cell therapies will be addressing relatively small patient populations in a very focused way, it's a good idea to have the academic research centers do a lot of the upfront research and achieve some of that proof of principle before the companies take it forward. That will make it more efficient.
How then do you divide public and private benefit?
The public benefit will always be in the form of, the most important public benefit will always be in the form of reduced healthcare cost. And that's what we're about. So the cell therapies that we're developing, even though they're more expensive to deliver on a patient-specific basis, our thesis is that we can treat these patients more cost-effectively than they're currently being treated now. And that's because many of the antiviral drugs either don't work, so you have the serious failure, if you will, of a therapy that doesn't work, or they cause many forms of side effects, which require treatment
in
themselves. And so when you look at antiviral drugs holistically in terms of not only the cost of the drugs, but dealing with the side effects that they often cause, then you can position a cell therapy to be very cost effective and to reduce the cost of health.
So how does the public sector get something back from this process?
Well, we work with a number of academic institutions, and we typically have a royalty or licensing arrangement with these institutions. So we do pay them a percentage of future sales if the cell therapy is successful. But of course, we still have to invest a fair amount in terms of the final regulatory approval trials and the work with the reimbursement authorities before we get the cell therapy into the market. So there needs to be a shared return, but certainly the public sector, the academic institutions, do get a share of the future profits.